Touch of the Nathrezim. This is a Warlock spell. 1 mana, deal 2 damage to a minion. If it dies, restore 4 health to your hero. So I think this card's probably just pretty good. Historically, Control Warlock has kind of lived or died by how much healing they have. And this is a very efficient healing spell. 1 mana, deal 2 damage, we've seen in the past, is like already pretty playable. I think it's pretty easy to kill a minion with that, so just seems pretty good. Somewhat reminiscent of Sword and Board, which is a card that's seen play in Warrior. Just seems solid. Unlike Sword and Board, maybe if you play this on turn 1, you're just at 30 and don't get any healing, whereas Sword and Board gives you armor, but I think it's fine. You're still pretty happy to be just killing like a 3-2 in the early game or something. And given that the new quest line for Warlock really wants you to be damaging yourself, it seems like heals are probably going to be even more important for the class going forward. Next up, we have the quest line for Priest. This is Seek Guidance. So the quest line is play a 2, 3, and 4 cost card. The reward is you discover a card from your deck. And then the next phase is play a 5 and 6 cost card. Again, you discover a card from your deck as the reward. And then finally, the last phase of the quest line is play a 7 and 8 cost card, and you get Xyrella the Sanctified. Xyrella the Sanctified is a 5 mana 7/7 with Taunt, and Battlecry, shuffle the Purified Shard into your deck. So after you go through all of that, you shuffle in the shard, you finally draw it, and it's 10 mana, destroy the enemy hero. So obviously a very powerful win condition. And I think this questline actually seems pretty solid. It's a win condition that you're guaranteed to always draw, which is like sometimes an issue in control mirrors if your win con is at the bottom. It is a guaranteed win condition, unlike something such as Cthulhu. Sometimes you play Cthulhu against like a priest or a warlock, and it just actually doesn't kill them because they can so easily heal to 30. And against Jaraxxus in particular, they just always have stats in play, so 30 damage isn't quite enough. Purified Shard does actually just win the game, which I think is pretty nice. And I think the quest line probably doesn't require too much effort. Basically, all 3 of them together, you just have to play cards that cost 2 through 8 mana. So you can basically just curve out. And the reward each step of the way is discovering a card from your deck. So if you play your 2, 3, 4, and then you have a 5 in your hand but no 6, then you just discover a 6. And same for the 7s and 8s. So I think you can actually hit this pretty consistently. And it even lines up so that you don't have to play a 9 cost card. So you have turn 9 to play Xyrella and then turn 10 to play Purified Shard. It is pretty slow because you do shuffle the shard into your deck. But Priest does have access to Thrive in the Shadows, which is 2 mana, discover a spell from your deck. So you could pretty reliably, I think, on turn 9, just play Xyrella, Thrive in the Shadows, discover the Purified Shard from your deck, and then you have Shard on turn 10 to kill the opponent. So, I mean, I think this just seems like a pretty solid win condition. Seems like you could pull it off pretty consistently. Maybe the only issue with this card is, like, maybe Priest just really doesn't have, say, a 6 cost card that they want to play in their deck, and you have to kind of force it a bit. I haven't really looked over each mana slot, but I think it's a powerful enough win condition. And it's a win condition that doesn't really, like, interfere too much with what you're doing throughout the game. It just kind of sits there and eventually your opponent dies. So, I think if a slow Priest deck is viable, this card might end up being really strong. Next up, we have Kodo Mount for Druid. It's a 4 mana spell. Give a minion +4, +2, and Rush. When it dies, summon a Kodo. And Guff's Kodo is a 4/2 with Rush. So I think this card is probably just quite good. Compared to Blessing of Kings, 4 mana for +4, +4. This is +4, +2, but instead of that 2 extra health, you give the minion Rush and Death Rattle, summon a 4/2 with Rush. So that seems like a pretty good trade-off. And Blessing of Kings is a card that goes in and out of decks over the years. I think this card is probably quite a bit better than Blessing of Kings. So I do expect it to be powerful enough to see play. One weird thing about it though is it's like a 4-mana buff that gives something rush. So it does kind of seem like it's pretty expensive to really use the rush because you need to like play a minion which maybe costs 3 or 4 mana, and then you need to play the Kodo Mount. So that's like a turn 7 play maybe. And if you're trying to like Druid plays a lot of minions like Primordial Protector or something that you really can't even combo this with. So it is a little bit awkward. I think in practice more often, this is just going to be give a minion +4/+2. You're probably just equipping it on something that can already attack anyway, so the rush up front probably doesn't mean that much. But you still get a Death Rattle 4/2 with rush, and that's still quite good, even if the initial rush isn't that impactful. I think the biggest issue with this card is finding a home for it. I think in like Primordial Protector, Guardian Animals Druid, you'd probably rather just play Broomstick. I don't think you really have room for this kind of card. And it's probably a bit awkward to play in Token Druid, because you'd rather just have a board-wide buff. You don't always have like a minion to play this on even. So in that sense, I do think this card's a little bit weird. I'm not really sure what Druid deck would want to play it, but I do think the power level of it is high enough that it could be played. Next up, we have the Rat King, a Hunter legendary. It's a 5-mana 5/5 beast with Rush, and Death Rattle go dormant, revive after 5 friendly minions die. So 5-mana 5/5 Rush is like already pretty solid, and in theory it can just keep resurrecting itself over and over throughout the game. Pretty similar to like a Sherazin Corpse Flower or a Waxadread maybe. And those cards were like kind of fine. And I think the effect on this card, like the conditional on it, is actually pretty easy to meet. We did get that new minion in Wailing Caverns that summons, I think it summons 4 1/1s. The Frenzy minion, that is. Yeah, it summons 4 1/1 hyenas. We've got Kolkar Packrunner. We still just have like Wolpertinger, Adorable Infestation. I think Hunter does have a lot of ways to just make a bunch of friendly minions. And even the next card we're going to look at, I think it's the next card, is going to be summoning a bunch of minions for us. So, I mean, the Rat King, it seems pretty powerful. But similar to the last card, I'm not sure if it really has a home. I don't think you just jam this in Face Hunter, because by turn 5, you want to just be playing Trampling Rhinos and running over the opponent's minions to kill them. I think this is probably a bit too slow for that deck. But if it can find a home, I think it will be pretty solid. It does seem like maybe they're actually pushing like a full-on Token Hunter this expansion. So in that case, this card could just be like the star of that deck. And it is like a legendary, so it's weird to like build around this card. But it is a beast, so you could find it consistently with Warsong Wrangler or the 2-mana 1/1 in the core set. So I think you can find this card pretty reliably. And it's also a Death Rattle minion that dies over and over again. So I assume if you revive this and it dies multiple times, you can just play Jewel of N'Zoth and get a bunch of Rat Kings. And then with all your Rat Kings, if you kill off minions, suddenly instead of getting a 5/5 rush every time, you're getting, 15/15 worth of rush every time. And it can be pretty hard for the opponent to stick a board if you're having that number of stats coming out every turn. Unlike previous iterations of the Dormant and Revive thing, this set does actually have Rush, so it's not nearly as slow as those. So yeah, seems like a pretty good card if there's enough support for the deck that wants to play it. Next up, we have Rats of Extraordinary Size. 6-mana Hunter spell, summons 7 1/1 rats. Any that can't fit on the battlefield, go to your hand with +4/+4. So the rats are 1-mana 1/1s. That means if it goes into your hand, it's going to be a 1-mana 5/5. So this card is potentially giving you just a lot of stats, a lot of value, a lot of board. Obviously, it's pretty good with the Rat King that we just saw because he wants 5 minions to die. This gives you 7 minions. And I think this card is just like pretty solid on its own. 6 mana for 7 1/1s. That's pretty similar to Swarm of Locusts, I believe it was called. is a hunter card. I believe it was also 6 mana, summoned a bunch of things, but they had Rush. So if you're not getting any of the rats in your hand, this does seem worse than Swarm of Locusts. But as soon as you get like 1 or 2 rats in your hand, suddenly you're getting, you know, an extra 4/4 worth of stats or an extra 8/8 worth of stats. And then this card ends up just being like pretty valuable, I think. If there are other cheaper ways to make sure your board is filled up, then this can even just be like you have 6 minions in play. You just play Rats of Extraordinary Size and fill your hand with a bunch of 1 mana 4/4s. Like that could be pretty strong. I will say though that it's a pretty slow card for sure. If you're up against like a face hunter and you're playing your token hunter, you're just going to get run over by the time this card is relevant. So it really depends on what's going on in the meta. It also kind of depends on like if there are a lot of flame strikes, then maybe adding a bunch of 1 mana 5/5s to your hand isn't especially good. But I think if there's more support for this sort of token hunter archetype, then this could definitely be like one of the better cards in the deck. A lot of potential in the Rats of Extraordinary Size. Next we have a priest spell, Call of the Grave. 1 mana, discover a Death Rattle minion. If you have enough mana to play it, trigger its Death Rattle. This is also a shadow spell, which is relevant for, is it Benedictus, the new legendary? I think it's Benedictus. So yeah, it's just discover a Death Rattle minion. It's not like a Death Rattle minion from your deck or when you've played this game or anything. So it is pretty random. But it has a lot of upside potential. If you have enough mana to play it, trigger its Death Rattle. So if you play this on, say like turn 7, you discover like a Claw Machine. Then this is 1 mana, discover a Claw Machine, and draw a minion from your deck and give it +3/+3. Like that's really insane if you have the mana for it. Even in the early game, you could maybe discover like a Reliquary of Souls. You just get a Reliquary in your hand and you shuffle a big one into your deck. That could be pretty powerful. Obviously, the strength of this card is going to depend pretty much entirely on what the pool of Death Rattles looks like. But I think right now there are a lot of good targets for it. I assume Priest itself will probably be getting maybe some Death Rattles that could make the pool for this a little bit better. So yeah, it just seems pretty solid. The Benedictus deck might be a little bit starved for shadow spells. This could be good in that deck. It just seems like it could be pretty good. Next we have a Druid legendary, Sheldras Moontree. 8 mana 5/5, Battle Cry. The next 3 spells you draw are cast when drawn. So I gotta say my initial impression of this card is that it's not very good. It's an 8 mana 5/5 Battle Cry, so you do have to actually play this card. And generally I think you're gonna be spending 8 mana on it, so it's very, very slow. But the thing is, the payoff of this card isn't even necessarily that great. Like, what if the next spell you draw is Lightning Bloom? You cast that with draw and you don't get any benefit out of it and you're forcing yourself to overload? Like, that's pretty bad. Even if you hit something like Nourish, you might hit the wrong choose one effect off of it. You could hit, I don't know. People are talking about playing this in a Celestial Alignment deck, but like, even then, you kind of want to be able to choose your targets. It's possible that you like top deck Celestial Alignment when your opponent has a board and you like need to clear it, but now you only have 1 card you can play this turn. So I don't know, I think the card just seems pretty awkward. Maybe there's like some really ridiculous setup you can do with this and something like Polkelt. If you can manage to play this, then Polkelt, stack like double Survival of the Fittest and Guardian Animals or something like that. Then it would be pretty insane because they are cast when drawn, so I'm assuming that means, I'm pretty sure that mechanic means that it gets played and then you draw another card. So off that Polkelt setup, you would get all 3 of Survival of the Fittest, both copies of that, and Guardian Animals all in 1 turn, plus you draw another card, which would obviously be very powerful. But my first impression of it is just that at the end of the day, this card is an 8 mana 5/5. It's probably just going to be too slow. I think even the Celestial Alignment deck can probably be doing better things with its mana. It's just an awkward, expensive card. Next we have Demonic Assault for Warlock. This is 4 mana, deal 3 damage, summon 2 1/3 Voidwalkers with Taunt. So my first impression of this card is that it's actually just pretty good. It's reminiscent of Flanking Strike, 4 mana, deal 3, summon some stuff. But I think 2 1/3 taunts are probably quite a bit better than a 3/3. The 1/3 taunts, they're just like multiple bodies, which makes them on their own harder to deal with. That's good like as an aggro deck or even against an aggro deck. Against aggro, this card kind of even reminds me of Giggling Inventor. It was just play a bunch of taunts. It doesn't really matter if they all suck. It's just a lot of taunts and they're hard to deal with. Now, Giggling Inventor sort of like effectively give you 4 taunts. This is only 2 taunts, but you also get to kill something, so it's like sort of 3. So yeah, I think this card is just pretty solid. Also, the 3 damage on it doesn't have to hit a minion. It can go face. And it's always nice to have a little bit of finishing potential, whether you're playing Control or something like Zoo. And I think this card could pretty easily find a home in really any Warlock deck, anywhere on the aggro control spectrum. I think it's just a very, very solid card. Next up we have Varian, King of Stormwind. So this is a neutral legendary, 8 mana 7/7, Battlecry, draw a rush minion to gain rush. Repeat for Taunt and Divine Shield. So this is pretty similar to Corpse Taker, which is actually one of my favorite cards of all time. But compared to Corpse Taker, instead of just having to have the things in your deck, this does actually draw them out of your deck. So it's 8 mana 7/7 with Rush, Taunt, Divine Shield, draw 3 cards. That's a really, really powerful late game threat. So obviously the biggest issue with this card is how easy is it to include all these keywords in your deck. Well, I think the most difficult of those is probably going to be Divine Shield, but I think there are actually a pretty reasonable number of neutral Divine Shield minions that you could use with this card. Obviously Paladin has all their class Divine Shields like Murgur, McGurgle, Goody 2 Shields. Paladin's not going to have any trouble with that. But you can also play like Annoyatron, Dark Moon Dirigible. Talon Fordring is probably the biggest Divine Shield minion. Talon also covers the taunt on this as well. I mentioned Annoyatron. Annoyatron also covers the taunt. But you do have to keep in mind with this card, with the way it's worded, I'm pretty sure if you... Let's see, it starts with Rush, then goes to Taunt, then Divine Shield. So if you draw Talon off Taunt, I'm pretty sure that only gives Taunt, and then you have to be able to draw another Divine Shield minion. So like with Corpse Taker, you could just play Ziliax, and that just covered all your bases. But with this one, I think you do need a separate minion for each keyword, which does make it a bit more of a commitment. But like I mentioned, you've got some redundancy with Talon and Annoyatron. I think Rush minions probably shouldn't be too hard to put in the deck. There's an unreasonable amount of Rush in the game right now. You can always just default to Animated Broomstick. Crab Rider is pretty good. Blade Master Samuro. So yeah, they're just some pretty good neutrals. And like most classes have a solid class taunt or a rush minion. And then taunts are all... There's taunts are pretty solid. Again, we have Talon and Annoyatron. There's also like Death's Head Cultist, Overconfident Orc, and again, most classes have taunt minions. So basically what I'm getting at is you can play this in 10 different classes. I think all 10 of them can probably support it reasonably well. It's bound to stick somewhere. It's 8 mana 7/7 with a bunch of keywords and it draws 3 cards. This card just seems really powerful. I think pretty much any deck that plans on going to 8 mana is going to at least try supporting this card. Next we have Overdraft, a Shaman spell. So this is 1 mana with tradable, and unlock your overloaded mana crystals to deal that much damage. So my first impression of this card is that it's absolutely broken. Unlock your overloaded mana crystals to deal that much damage. I mean, this can pretty easily, keep in mind this can go face. So this can pretty easily unlock like 4 overloaded mana crystals, and it's just 4 mana deal, or 1 mana deal 4 damage, which is just really insane in a class that already has Lightning Bolt, Serpent Shrine Portal, Doom Hammer. The deck already has so much damage and they're giving it more damage. So this card seems pretty nutty. And if I'm understanding the card correctly, comparing it to, I think it was Lava Shock, the previous card that unlocked your overloaded mana crystals, that unlocked your overloaded mana crystals for this turn and next turn. So say that you are on like turn 6 and you're overloaded for 4 this turn, then this would be 1 mana deal 4 damage. But from there, you could also just play Lightning Bolt, which would overload you for 1 next turn, and then Overdraft would clear the one from next turn as well and deal 5 damage. So this card can potentially deal a lot of damage. And probably the easiest way to really abuse this is going to be with Lightning Bloom. So Lightning Bloom is going to let you cheat something out, and it's going to deal 2 damage with Overdraft, basically. So yeah, I mean, it just seems like this card, it does a lot of damage. It unlocks your mana crystals so you can play more cards. It's just really good. Now, it is situational, like if you don't have overloaded mana crystals, then it doesn't do anything. But it's got tradable, which just on its own is an insane keyword. So if this isn't 1 mana deal 6 damage to your opponent's face, it's 1 mana draw a card, which is just good. I think really, there are 2 things that might prevent this card from seeing play. The first of which is, I believe it's Primal Dungeoneer. That's the Shaman one that wants you to have nature spells. This is not a nature spell, so it does conflict with that. But I think this card's probably good enough that you can just play it anyway. You play like 10 nature spells, 2 of these. Most of the time you double draw with the Dungeoneer, sometimes you don't, but when you don't, you hit Overdraft, so you're still pretty happy. The other thing that might hold this card back from seeing play is maybe the best Shaman deck just isn't an Overload Shaman. The current popular, like, Elemental Shaman builds don't really play enough Overload to support this, I would say. They just have, like, a couple Lightning Bolts, a couple Serpent Shrine Portals, and I think that might be it. I think they don't even play Lightning Bloom. But you can just play a Doomhammer deck instead, one that does play Lightning Blooms, and then suddenly, you know, you have a bunch of damage in your deck, a bunch of overload in your deck. And this card starts to look just pretty insane. I think this card might be good enough that you start playing the more overload builds instead of the sort of all-in elemental builds that we see right now. Of all the cards I've seen so far in the set, I think this one is the most likely candidate to be nerfed. It's just such efficient damage, and tradable is such an insane keyword. Next up we have Lothar, a warrior legendary. 7 mana 7/7, at the end of your turn, attack a random enemy minion. If it dies, gain +3/+3. So my initial impression of this card is, like, you can already play Troublemaker. There's also the Runaway Blackwing that has like an end of turn kill something effect. So I wasn't that impressed. But, I mean, this does cost less mana than those. It's a 7 mana 7/7. That's a pretty good stat line. You can kind of evaluate it as a 7 mana 10/10 rush. And then it even just keeps being insane every turn that the opponent can't deal with it. I think Warrior currently doesn't really have something on turn 7. So this could fit into that slot. It seems big enough on turn 7 that it's pretty much always going to kill what it runs into. This card's probably just pretty good in any deck that's trying to curve up to like Troublemaker and Alexstrasza. I think it's just solid. There's really not that much to say about it. It's also like good with Commencement if that's your thing. Just a solid card, I think. It may end up just not being quite strong enough. Warrior does have a lot of really powerful stuff going on. But you try it out. Probably sticks somewhere. Next we have Best in Shell. This is a druid spell. So 6 mana, it's tradable, and you can summon 2 2/7 turtles with taunt. So yeah, I mean, I think this card's just pretty good. It says tradable on it, so it can't be that bad. And 6 mana, summon 2 2/7 turtles with taunt. That's a lot of taunt. That's 14 health worth of taunts. We've seen from like Spreading Plague that if you just slap a bunch of taunt on the board, sometimes that's just really hard to deal with. I think it's enough taunt that it's pretty good. 6 mana is something that druids don't really abuse super well at the moment, so this could fit in there. I think this could be a really powerful card with Solar Eclipse. We've seen how, like, Cenarian Ward is such a mediocre card, but when you play it with Solar Eclipse, suddenly it's insane. I think Best in Shell is probably pretty similar in that regard. But compared to Cenarian Ward, you can do it 2 turns earlier, and then suddenly you have 4 2/7s with Taunt. And that's gonna, like, basically just shut down the game against any sort of aggro deck. And did I mention that it has Tradable? Tradable's really insane. I think this card is probably just pretty good. It's also like a really good set of bodies for Arbor Up. Maybe you play this on 6 and then save your Solar Eclipse for Arbor Up on 7. I think it's just a good card. Next we have Tiny Toys, a Shaman spell. 6 mana, summon 4 random 5-cost minions, make them 2/2. So compare this to Runic Carvings, the Shaman Druid dual class spell. That was 6 mana, summon 4 2/2s. Those you could give Rush, but these are 5-cost minions, so they have additional text on them potentially. I haven't really taken the time to like evaluate every single 5-cost minion, and there's not really much point in doing that because there's still 5-cost minions to be revealed going forward. But you can hit like Talon. Talon is insane with this. You can hit Rast, Greybow. Even if you hit something like Ruststeed Raider, it's still got Rush. There's just like a lot of high rolls that you can hit off this. So I think on its own, it just seems like a pretty solid card. But probably the biggest thing with it is just play it in Evolve Shaman. It gives you 4 5-cost minions. This curves right after Bogspine Knuckles. So you just weapon on 5, and then you go Tiny Toys, attack with your weapon, and you have 4 6-cost minions. Plus whatever other stuff you have in play. And between Cage Match Custodian and the Primal Dungeoneer, you can draw your Bogspine Knuckles pretty much every game. So yeah, I mean, I think this card is just like pretty good in Evolve Shaman. Is it good enough that you're going to be playing Evolve Shaman instead of the Overload Shaman or instead of Elemental Shaman? That I'm not entirely sure about. But it has so much blowout potential with the weapon that it's definitely at least worth keeping an eye on. Next we have Park Panther for Druid. 4 mana 4/4 beast with Rush. Whenever this attacks, give your hero +3 attack this turn. So this seems like a pretty solid minion. It's like pretty good at controlling the board because you're very likely going to be able to kill 2 things for 4 mana. And Druid does somewhat struggle with handling early boards. They've got like Lunar Eclipse, and maybe you can pay 3 mana for Bog Beam. But other than that, you're just kind of sitting there and ramping. So maybe this is a nice option for the deck. But on turn 4, even against aggro, a lot of times you probably would rather just play Overgrowth. And this is also a beast, which may or may not be a good thing. It's hard to say. This is definitely not the strongest thing that you could be hitting off of Guardian Animals. But it's probably still, like, kind of fine. I'm not sure if it makes the cut in that deck, though. It's pretty sketchy. It is pretty good in the deck that plays, is it Living Seed, the Druid rank spell? You can even just Living Seed on 2, and then draw and play this on 3. So, like, that's pretty good. We do also have Menagerie Warden in the core set, so something else to keep an eye on. But it's definitely going to be a matter of whether or not this card can find a home. My guess is that with the current card pool, this card probably would not see play. But it's very close to seeing play, and it's probably even kind of meta-dependent. Like, people play Thick-Hide Kodo in Guardian Animals Druid now, instead of, like, a Teacher's Pet or whatever. That's not something that I would have necessarily expected, but because of the meta, it just happens to make a little bit more sense. I could see Park Panther being the same in that regard. Definitely a fine card. Next we have Shiver Their Timbers. 1 mana warrior spell. Deal 2 damage to a minion. If you control a pirate, deal 5 instead. So 1 mana, deal 2 to a minion. You would definitely rather play Sword and board. So you do need to be playing a reasonable number of pirates to support this. Warrior does have a couple pirates that they just kind of play in their decks between Sword Eater and Stonemaul Anchorman. And those are like both pretty solid. But I don't think 4 pirates is going to be quite enough to support this. So I think you'd probably need to be playing more. Maybe if they get like another really sick pirate in the set, then you can just play 6 pirates and then like maybe it starts looking pretty okay. But even then, how good is this card really? Back in the day, Hunter had, what was that card called? It was like Wing Blast or Wing Attack or something like that. Yeah, it was Wing Blast, which was situationally a 1-mana deal 4 to a minion. And that card just kind of ended up not really being playable. It's just like weird to have a spell that just does damage to a minion. And Shiver Their Timbers is kind of giving me those kinds of vibes. I think it's a bit situational in activation, but it's also like situational in needing to deal 5 damage to a minion. Also, if you're playing a pirate deck or really just any warrior deck, like you kind of just already have weapons to be dealing damage to minions, right? So, I don't know, I'm not very optimistic about this card, but like it's fine. It definitely wouldn't shock me if it ended up in a deck, but I think it's unlikely. Next we have Cornelius Roame, a neutral legendary. 6 mana, 4/5. At the start and end of each player's turn, draw a card. So effectively what this does is at the end of each player's turn, you draw 2 cards. I don't really understand why it's like at the end of your turn and then at the beginning of your opponent's turn. It seems like very, very few circumstances where that distinction matters. So this card just seems like sort of needlessly complicated in its wording. But basically, you play this card, it's a 6 mana 4/5 that draws 2, and then every turn your opponent can't kill it, you draw 4 more cards, because they can't kill it, so you draw at the end of their turn, the beginning of your turn, and then it's your turn, so you draw again at the end of your turn and the beginning of their turn. So this is 6 mana 4/5, draw a shitload of cards, basically. And it's a neutral. So, I mean, this card just seems like really, really insane. It just draws so many cards. And at 6 mana 4/5, it's like pretty reasonably statted. It's sort of similar to Emperor Thaurissan. And we know how many decks Emperor Thaurissan went in. I feel like you probably just play this in like most decks. Maybe not like Demon Hunter, because you'd rather be playing Skull of Gul'dan on this turn or something. But yeah, I mean, this card is definitely going to be played somewhere. Might be played everywhere. It's just insane, really. It's just an insane card. Next we have Elwynn Boar, a neutral minion. 1 mana, 1/1 beast with Death Rattle. If you had 7 Elwynn Boars die this game, equip a 15/3 Sword of 1,000 Truths. And the Sword of 1,000 Truths is 10 mana, but you equip it with the Death Rattle, so you don't have to spend 10 mana on it. 15/3 weapon. After your hero attacks, destroy your opponent's mana crystals. So obviously an absolutely insane payoff. And if I'm not mistaken, this is a reference to the World of Warcraft episode of South Park, which is kind of funny. But as far as the card itself goes, I mean, you can only put 2 copies of this card in your deck. You need to have 7 of them die in the game. So it does seem like it's going to be pretty hard to ever actually equip the Sword of 1,000 Truths. You can play it in like Priest with Raise Dead, and that can pretty reliably hit you 6 boars, but that's only if you're not playing any other minions. And you still need to find another one. That other one can be from like maybe Gift of Luminance or Faceless Manipulator or something like that. Like it's definitely doable in Priest. But in Priest, you probably just play the quest line, right? In Hunter, you do have Selective Breeder, so you can discover copies of this from your deck. You can also shuffle more in with Dire Frenzy. But I feel like maybe at that point, you're already winning the game if you're doing all that Dire Frenzy nonsense. You do, I believe, need to have 7 boars die in the game, not just this Death Rattle goes off 7 times. So I don't think something like Mok'Nathal Lion would support this very well. Yeah, it seems like really your only chance at abusing this is going to be in Priest, and I feel like Priest probably has a better win condition. I think this is mostly just a meme card, kind of like Mogu Cultist. But it is pretty sick, and if you can pull it off, it's going to be really cool. And then finally for today, we have Shady Bartender for Warlock. It's a 5 mana 4/4 with tradable, and Battlecry, give your demons +2/+2. So tradable, love to see it, card's already playable. Battlecry, give your demons +2/+2, so this definitely feels like a Zoo card, right? And Zoo does have a lot of cheap demons that they can curve into this card. They've got their Flame Imps and their Spirit Jailers, Midway Maniac, Dark Glare. They've also got like Fiendish Circle is in standard. So yeah, Warlock definitely can play the demons to support this, I think. And if you can support it, you really only need to hit like 2, maybe even just 1 demon for this card to be powerful. So yeah, I mean, it seems like a very solid card. It's really just a matter of, is Zoo going to be a viable strategy? And I saw a comment on the reveal thread for this card, and it was just like, Zoo just doesn't work when half the minions in the game have Rush. And I think that's pretty true. Zoo really cares about getting on the board, taking value trades to stay ahead on the board, and you can't do that when you're not the one dictating your trades with tempo. When your opponent can always just play a rush minion and they get the advantageous trade. So yeah, like I'm pretty concerned about whether or not Zoo will be a deck. I think it probably needs some more support in this set for the Shady Bartender to see play. But if it does get the support, the Shady Bartender is, I think, a very powerful sort of like finisher card for that deck.